Hello, my name is Lillian Jacobs, and I will be presenting my paper titled American English, the Impact of Mark Twain on American Literature. Mark Twain is considered the quintessential American writer for good reason. His novels Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer encapsulate the spirit of the newly born nation of America. At a time when Americans were developing their own unique culture and ethos, Twain used humorous and satirical language to critique the social landscape and reflect on human nature. Twain pioneered a style of writing that used colloquial language and vernacular speech to emphasize and resonate with people of various social classes, particularly the working class. His use of language was revolutionary in its ability to accurately convey incisive commentary through clear and direct vocabulary. In particular, Twain's biblical retelling, The Private Life of Adam and Eve, reflects this innovative American English writing style. Twain's retelling is significant for its ability to convey deep religious and social themes through everyday language that is often humorous or satirical, standing in contrast to works such as Milton's Paradise Lost. Twain created a new standard for American literary works, using the English language in a way that critiqued social and culture ideology while being highly accessible and using familiar colloquial language. Further, Twain's work would not have been possible without Noah Webster's contributions in creating American linguistic identity. In order to understand the significance of Twain's work, it is necessary to first understand the historical and cultural context surrounding the emergence of a unified American English. At the time the Declaration of Independence was written, English was a language that varied in spelling and grammatical conventions. To modern readers, the arbitrary capitalization and unconventional vocabulary can seem archaic. At this time, a clear American linguistic identity had not yet been established. In the late 18th century, writers such as Adam Smith, Thomas Paine, and Edward Gibbon had a profound impact on American ideology, paving the way for an American literary canon. When Noah Webster first published what was to be the American Dictionary in 1806, his ideas about how Americans should use language were considered to be radical, challenging the linguistic hegemony of the British. Webster pioneered the idea that language could be used to demonstrate a national identity, in effect, creating a national debate among American writers, philosophers, and politicians about whether British language conventions, such as the U in governor or the K in magic, should be dropped in favor of a new American flavor of English. In particular, Webster's influence on spelling, lexicography, and linguistic identity proved that Americans were interested in breaking old traditions and forging their own paths, free of British influence. Webster realized that a national identity could cut across social, political, and economic lines. A nation's language could influence the thought and, by implication, the behavior of its citizens. Significantly, language that was thought of as popular or colloquial began to pervade dictionaries and spellers, creating the idea that everyday direct language could be included in works of literature and philosophy. Researching the colloquial language of America was a revolutionary idea. Prior to this time, literary works were written in a way that was an elevated version of the dialect that people spoke. Webster's popular dictionaries were a way in which language became more accessible and aligned with popular culture and identity. Not an emphasis on just the popular and the colloquial, but an emphasis on the colloquial as a means of access to the true structure of the world was central to Webster's idea of a popular national culture as it emerged during the late 18th century. Partly due to the French and American revolutions, people were willing to overturn old hegemonic traditions of education and privilege in favor of creating a national identity that was democratic rather than hierarchical. Interestingly, in both Europe and America, intellectuals had begun to hope that in the untutored thought and expression of a nation's ordinary people might lie a way out of a solipsistic universe. They began to hope that in popular language there might be a reliable source of truth. The ornate and flowery Old World English was slowly being replaced by language that was increasingly representative of the common people. However, Webster's goal of using national colloquial language in order to access the truth was not without conflict. When discussing etymology, Webster maintained that there was a direct and intelligible relationship that cut across linguistic differences and that embodied universal concepts of perception. Despite this perspective, for all his decades of thought about how language can influence and indicate national identity, Webster could not prove that there was a link between the formation of language and the emergence of culture. He was interested in how etymology could contain truths about national identity in order to further his ideas in creating an American culture that was informed by language and dialect. Johann David Michael's dissertation on the influence of opinions on language and of language on opinions 1760 was a major influence to Webster, but Michaeli's ideas created a dilemma about whether language signified truth. While Webster was greatly interested in the importance of colloquial language to national identity, the dissertation did not provide Webster with a solution to the epistemological problems of post-Lockean thought. This dilemma was finally resolved for Webster in part by his conversion to Christianity. His revelation that reality is spiritual in nature brought together his ideas about the etymology of language and the importance of a linguistic identity. In addition, Webster's relationship with spirituality and religion would influence generations of Americans. Noah Webster found in the idea of active spirit, of a sovereign God continuously creating all reality, the guarantee that behind the phenomena of the world there existed a stable, enduring spiritual foundation, a foundation on which Americans could rear an enduring culture. The uniquely American blend of rationalism, colloquialism, and religiosity can be traced to Webster's focus on linguistics and spirituality. His insights on linguistics were inextricably linked with his convictions on the reality of an omnipresent God who created language. It is from this contextual background of a rigorous national linguistic identity and an entrenched spirituality that Mark Twain emerged. Born Samuel Clemens in 1835, the name Mark Twain is now synonymous with a style of writing that is peppered with colloquialisms, regional dialect, and humor. Twain is arguably the defining writer of American literature. He certainly paved the way for all succeeding American writers. Hemingway once remarked that all modern American literature comes from one book from Mark Twain called Huckleberry Finn. And despite other important writers that were contemporaries of Twain, such as James Fenimore Cooper and William Dean Howells, Twain's works have had the biggest impacts on readers due to his use had the biggest impact on American literature. His works resonated the most with American readers due to his use of humor and focus on social issues. Twain bridged the gap between writers of an older tradition such as Washington Irving and modern writers such as William Faulkner. We should see Twain as standing between an older continuing literary tradition and a new, more realistic and cynical movement, which was to challenge the old but never completely overcome it. However, as significant as Twain is to modern literature, it is important to note that his works did not completely overshadow the previous generation of American writers. Some literary scholars disagree with Hemingway's claim, stating that Twain's preeminence in the American literary canon is overstated. For example, Kalish points out that traditional American themes such as Puritanism and Romanticism did not completely fade away with the emergence of novels such as Huckleberry Finn. Twain takes on the whole of American mythology and reveals it for what he thought it was: shallow, hypocritical, mean, and in the most humanistic of definitions, evil. Yet the romantic tradition persists and will be with us as long as Americans continue to read. While it is true that the certain aspects of Puritanism persist even in the present day, and that romantic literary themes, such as those found in Irving's work, remain iconic, Twain's use of language has been the factor that has rightfully cemented him as the father of American literature. He captured the spirit of 19th century American culture as few other writers have been able to do before or since. The way that Twain was able to explore issues of race, social class, and gender roles using language that was sly, humorous, and direct is unparalleled in the literary canon. While other authors such as Hawthorne, Poe, and Emerson are monumental figures in American literature, Twain's contribution to the field is unique because he wrote using regional dialects and vernacular writing. In addition, he created complex characters that gave a voice to people who were often let out of literary traditions at the time, such as the character Jim in Huckleberry Finn. Another reason why literary scholars may underestimate the significance of Twain on American literature is his writing almost always contained elements of humor. In fact, long before he was considered a serious writer, Twain was a humorist. The specific type of comedy Twain excelled at was not considered a facet of serious literature. Although satire has long been a respected form of literature, such as Voltaire's Candide, humor that incorporated dialects, vernacular, and everyday speech and situations was virtually non-existent. The fact that, despite occasional detraction, Twain was able to achieve such a high level of distinction in the field of literature is a direct result of Noah Webster's influence. Without Webster's work to create a national consciousness through language, Twain would not have had a foundation upon which to explore American identity through humorous, colloquial language. Further, Twain's work has endured the test of time and held on to vitality due to his ability to tread a fine line between humor and complexity. Those who criticized Twain had to concede that he transcended the label of humorist because he succeeded in finding a sense of balance, forging a flexible style that conveys subtlety and density of meaning, as well as a disarming fluidity of ordinary conversational speech. It is precisely this quality that sets him apart from being a genre writer. Twain's humor contains relatability, truth, and complexity. The humor contained in his works is not merely gratuitous or decorative. It serves as a purpose of capturing the way that everyday, normal people talk and behave. Furthermore, Twain had a knack for convincing dialogue that sounds realistic when read aloud. As opposed to other contemporary writers such as Cooper and Irving, Twain's writing is largely free from flowery, ostentatious prose. Most of his writing is characterized by language that is simple and direct due to the usage of vernacular. Countless scholars have examined the impact of Twain's novels Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. They are often required reading in American curriculums. However, some of Twain's more obscure works, such as The Private Life of Adam and Eve, are excellent examples of how Twain used American English in unique and innovative ways. Published late in Twain's life, this fictionalized version of Adam and Eve is striking in its originality. In this novel, Adam and Eve talk, think, and behave in ways that are distinctively American. Consider an example from the beginning of the narrative. Been examining the Great Waterfall. It is the finest thing on the estate, I think. The new creature calls it Niagara Falls. Why? I am sure I do not know. The first-person narration is the first aspect of the work to note. It is indicative of a casual, direct style of writing that differs greatly from previous works that considered religious themes. In fact, Twain's biblical retellings are the precedent for the plethora of modern works that retell biblical stories in novel and sometimes transgressive ways, such as Moses, Man of the Mountain by Zora Neale Hurston, and Cain by Jose Saramago. Twain did not hold biblical stories as sacrosanct. Instead, Twain sought to explore the themes in these stories through language that was highly accessible to modern readers. Twain's reframing of the story of Adam and Eve makes them seem truly human. He intentionally infuses his language with terms and phrases that invoke Americanism. In the above example, readers envision Adam and Eve as being in the vicinity of Niagara Falls. Of course, it is highly humorous to imagine Adam and Eve wandering around western New York, and readers know that the work is not intended to be a historically accurate retelling. However, the humor inherent in this work does more than just entertain. It reveals Adam and Eve to be just as real and human as the reader. This quality gets to the heart of Twain's writing. The Private Life of Adam and Eve looks at the Bible through the lens of early 19th century American culture. Twain's point in intentionally using colloquial and vernacular language was to render the Bible accessible and relatable to Americans. Twain's use of language in this retelling can also be interpreted as subversive, as when Adam asserts that, after all these years, I see that I was mistaken about Eve in the beginning. It is better to live outside the garden with her than inside it without her. Blessed be the chestnut that brought us near together and taught me to know the goodness of her heart and the sweetness of her spirit. In this passage, Twain uses phrases such as blessed be and sweetness of spirit that echo language found in the Bible. However, Twain's use of biblical language and themes are satirical in nature. Adam blesses the circumstances that brought them together and welcomes his fate outside of the garden. He does not seem to harbor resentment against Eve for succumbing to temptation. Historically, Eve has been demonized, with women unjustly bearing the brunt of the reality of a sinful and fallen world. In the diaries, Twain uses language in a unique way to critique this ideology. For example, despite Adam's view of Eve as being silly or frivolous at times, Adam often defers to Eve's ideas, creating the assumption that Eve has knowledge of which he does not fully comprehend. This can be seen with the birth of her first child, when Adam is late to catch on. For example, when Adam states simply that she calls it Abel, Twain is using vernacular phrases in a specific way in order to subtly critique assumptions about women and gender roles. This is a distinctly American perspective. Running parallel to the strong religious identity of Americans is a sense of rebellion. In America, there has always been tension between conformity and revolt, starting with the Loyalists and Patriots during the time of the American Revolution. Twain effectively explored this tension by using language in a revolutionary way. His humor was not simple escapism. Instead, his colloquial language was a way for him to make satirical observations on American society and culture. In The Private Life of Adam and Eve, his deft control of American English displays how the language had branched off from the old tradition of European writing. Webster, although relatively conservative in many ways, was radical in that he conceived of a way for language to reflect national identity. His commitment to forming a linguistic identity enabled Twain to use language in a way that continues to resonate with all Americans, cutting across class, race, gender, and time. Thank you.